when she speaks, we'll be able to know. Just a minute.
There we go.
Good evening and welcome to the study session. I call the order for the study session at 6:02. Let the record reflect that all board members are here. Mrs. Fisher and Ms. Simak are there on remote. And the presentation goes to Mrs. Galligan.
I would like
Dr.
to
Galligan.
make a motion that
Oh,
we adopt the
motion.
agenda.
Yes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Dr. Galligan.
Aye.
Okay. 5-0.
Good evening, President Paperman, members of the board, Dr. Finch, and guests. Over the past 5 weeks, a team of educators have come together to create a plan for grading in DVUSD. Some of these educators you can see right over here. First, a little bit about the team. All Deer Valley Unified School District educators were invited to apply for this work team. From the list of applicants, members were selected to create a balanced representation of the team. The 26-member team consists of a balance of educators from formerly Phase 1 and Phase 2 schools. Region representation was fairly balanced, as well as key educator roles were represented. As you can see here, the breakdown between our regions, you can see the roles of our teachers, and then DVA representation, BLT representation, IS&T, so forth and so on. It was a wide scope group. The team worked through the governing board request for grading practices in DVUSD, which included one meaningful grade each week, course grades with letter marks, 0 to 100% grade scale. All Deer Valley Unified School District schools, elementary, middle, and high school, would use the same scales, and that we would implement in the 23-24 school year. I am happy to turn this presentation over now to members of the DVUSD Grading Practices Work Team sitting right here and behind me. We're going to begin with Ms. Jackie McCormick.
Good evening, President Paperman, members of the Governing Board, Dr. Finch, and guests. My name is Jackie McCormick, and I am a 7th grade math teacher at Union Park. One of the first things that the team addressed was the Governing Board's direction that teachers post meaningful grades weekly. The team defined a meaningful grade entry as an assessment of coursework that measures learning standards. Since some courses do not typically meet 5 days a week, such as elementary art, the team determined a reasonable adjustment to the once per week requirement. Additionally, the team clarified that there must be a grade entry that impacts the course grade. In other words, not an exempt grade, just something every 2 weeks minimally. Much of our meeting time was spent on determining grade scales and calculations that align with a letter grade and 0 to 100% grading system. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jenny Mullins, to talk about this as it applies to the primary grade levels of kindergarten through 2nd grade.
Good evening, President Paperman, members of the Governing Board, Dr. Finch, and guests. My name is Jenny Mullins, and I am a 5th and 6th grade teacher at the Traditional Academy at Bel Air. Since teaching, assessing, and giving feedback on the standards is the cornerstone of what we do in the classroom, it is highly important that we are transparent with students and parents about each student's proficiency of the learning standards. Because of this, the team was unanimous in that all teachers are required to tag and enter proficiency levels for standards for all assessment gradebook entries. Individual standards marks will be averaged together to compose an overall mark for each standard for the grading period. The team selected the calculation method of averaging the most recent 3 proficiency marks to determine the overall level for each standard, which is the method K through 6 Power School gradebooks have functioned on for more than a decade. For grades kindergarten through second, the proficiency levels will be entered as 4, 3, 2, 1, which is the scale these teachers have used for more than a decade. However, the descriptors for these levels were updated to remove the terms independently and with support, as these terms were understood and applied vastly differently among teachers. Kindergarten students receive standards marks but do not receive overall course grades. The team felt that this decades-long practice should continue. For first and second grades, the team felt that the letter grades of E, S, N, and U, which are long-standing grade marks in our district, which would be most comfortable for teachers and most developmentally appropriate for our young primary learners. Again, kindergarten students do not receive overall course grades, so a course grade calculation method is not needed. For first and second grades, the overall standards grades will be averaged to determine the overall course grade and reported as a letter grade of E, S, N, or U. I am now going to turn it over to Chelsea Lanningham to talk about grading for 3rd through 12th grades.
Good evening, President Paperman, members of the governing board, Dr. Finch, and guests. My name is Chelsea Lanningham, and I am a high school teacher at Aspire, Deer Valley's online academy. I will continue to share the grade scales and calculations for grades 3 through 12. Teachers of 3rd through 12th graders will also mark standards proficiency using the 4, 3, 2, 1 scale. Beginning in 3rd grade, students take state assessments which use these levels in proficiency descriptors. So this scale aligns well with what students, parents, and teachers already are familiar with. For the overall course grades, a grade scale using letters of A, B, C, D, and F with percentages of 0 to 100% will be used as directed by the governing board. For grades 3 through 12, the standard marks will be informational and will not be used to calculate the overall course grade. Instead, teachers will enter an assignment score from 0 to 100, which will be averaged with other assignment scores to produce an overall course grade. A D and above is a passing grade. Teachers will use a skill-based rubric to score assessments and then use this chart to determine the aligned percentage-based grade to enter in the gradebook. For example, if a student took an assessment and scored a 4 on one standard and 2 3s on other standards, the teacher would enter a score between 85 to 89%. This method will provide more consistency among teachers, yet give teachers some flexibility and autonomy within the ranges. All percentages from 0 to 100% are available. Each summer, parents and students in grades 3 through high school receive state assessment reports that categorize students in proficiency level bands based upon their performance on standards. So this method of aligning scores with proficiency ranges corresponds with state assessment reports and supports the work of PLC collaborative teams. The team unanimously agreed that teachers should have the same categories available in the gradebook. The categories will be assessment, weighted at 80%, coursework, weighted at 20%, and practice with a 0% weight. In order to ensure accurate reporting of academic performance, no extra credit is allowed, and there will be no academic grade penalties for student misbehaviors.
For IB diploma and middle year program courses, grading will look a bit differently than for other courses. We will work with the program leads at the 2 schools, Barry Goldwater and Norterra Canyon, to ensure grading procedures align to the requirements of those programs, including the requirements of not using weights for averaging. Those teachers will be trained on how to enter marks for standards and criterion that align with the IBO parameters and to use the assessment category only to avoid weighting. The teachers will use the IBO scoring rubrics and a conversion chart to enter marks in the gradebook. I want to give a huge shout out and recognize the group of thoughtful, perceptive, and creative educators who are part of this work team. In a very short time, they came together to find solutions and a cohesive, unified grading practice system for the district as a whole. We have previewed the DVUSD grading practices with several groups. I mentioned those in the update last week for feedback, and all groups were highly supportive of this grading practices plan. We are here for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Board members, any questions? Ms. Thorway? No? Mr. Carver?
Sure. So I think we can all agree that the K through 2 grades, I mean, for as far as I can remember, have always been standards-based, right? I mean, pluses, minuses, and check marks, right? So nothing's really going to change there, except we're going to adopt numbers instead of symbols. Yes?
President Paperman, Mr. Carter, it'll be ESNU. There won't be pluses or minuses. It will just be ESNU, which is what we've had in the past for decades.
Right. And then you mentioned there towards the end on the questions screen, so the MYP and IB programs will maintain what they need as far as SBG to be program compliant, correct?
President Paperman, Mr. Carver, not SBG. They will follow everything that you just heard from Ms. Lanningham and have a conversion chart that will transfer it over into the IBO criteria necessary.
Okay. I just know a lot of folks were concerned that if we didn't maintain the SBG with the IB program, that would put us in jeopardy. No?
No.
Okay.
Prior, 5-10 years ago, they've always used a conversion chart. It just is, it's a second step for our IB teachers that they will have to do.
Right. I understand. And then help me understand standards grade versus coursework grade. Is that, I mean, and I do apologize, but we all know that I'm the new guy in the room here. So if this is a silly question, I do apologize. Is that, for lack of a better term, kind of two sets of books? I mean, we need to track the standards, but then when it comes to the grade book, we're going to have a percentage based off of the standards grades that they're displaying?
President Paperman, Mr. Carter, I'm going to turn it over to our teachers, and they can share what they do. And we have a mixture of elementary, middle, high, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 here.
President Paperman, Mr. Carver, we would design lessons based on the standard. And then I would give the student a score on the standard, and I would put that in the gradebook, tag that in the gradebook for assessments only. It's not required for coursework. And then based off of that scale that you saw, I would take the percentage and put that as the coursework grade, or the grade. So it's reporting in two areas, but it gives the communication to the students, the teachers, and the parents of where they are at, as well as the overall grade for like averaging together in the course. And this also helps us with Canvas so that it's easily converted if teachers are using Canvas, which is our LMS, to transfer their grades into Power Schools.
Okay. And I apologize. I have so many questions, but I don't want us to have to keep back and back and back. Explain to me student behavior grades. What does that look like? I'm old, so when you talk about behaviors, it's usually tied to citizenship, and I know that that's different. So please.
Mrs. Paperman, Mr. Carver, no, that's exactly what you're correct with what you're saying. Citizenship is the behavior. We will not be having penalty for we'll give them opportunities to do their missing work and turn in things late, but they will not be penalized for that because that's considered a behavior grade. That will be under citizenship, so you are correct.
So then for clarification, if a student doesn't turn in an assignment, having recently come through college, if I didn't turn in my assignment on the day that it was due, every day it was late, I lost 10%. Are you saying that will not be the case in this environment then?
Mrs. Paperman, Mr. Carver, we actually discussed this.
Okay.
Page 8 in the PRAG, the DVUSD grading practices. There's 3 terms that are defined. We have missing work, That's an assignment is considered as missing work when it's not submitted by the due date. Late work, an assignment is considered late work when the assignment is not submitted by the due date that was established, but is submitted within the late work timeframe listed below. And if you turn the page to page 9, there are stipulations that they have to, specify parameters that they have to meet for missing and late work.
Okay, thank you. The other thing that I know folks are going to reach out to me about is I see on slide 17, it looks like what we've developed is we're going to continue to grade based on standards, but we're going to correlate that up into an A through F, 0 through 100 grading system for communication purposes so that parents in the community understand where their children are. I just want to make sure that, let me back up. So during this whole process, I've been educated repeatedly that the difficulty a child experiences with a 0 is that it's impossible to get out of it. I guess my thought process had always been, again, being old and remembering what a grade book looked like. In any given semester, you could see easily over 100 assignments from back in the day. And the way that I understand this at the 40,000 foot level is you might open up a grade book at the end of a semester and maybe see 8 to 10 graded assignments. Is that a fair statement? Okay, so I understand then why a 0 would be harmful. Help me understand the movement from multiple assignments where a 0 can be easily overcome through excelling in future assignments to dwindling the number of assignments down. I understand we're probably going for a quality versus quantity concept, but help me understand that so that the people listening can understand also, please.
President Paperman, Mr. Carver, we've always graded on standards. We've always made a correlation. I'm a phase 3 school, so I actually did the standards, but we did the percentages as well. And we are always correlating those. And it's not necessarily, 8 is a minimum. There are so many standards in math that we have to cover. So for a teacher to have 8, I just don't see that happening. Because we do have to grade on every standards, which we're already doing.
Right.
But now we're actually making it easier to communicate with the parents and the students where they can see this is the standard. It's correlated with this percentage and this assignment. Parents don't always have they don't always know about the standards based. If you just gave them a 4, they're like, what's a 4? Well, now there's that correlation, which is what this team came up with unanimously about between the standards and the grades.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the fine detail that everybody gave me in their answers, and I hope that this helps to alleviate some of the concerns that the community had. I understand the concept behind standards-based grading, but as we've all discussed, I think this approach is much better in trying to move the direction that the administration would like to move, but in also allowing the community to understand what their child needs to do in order to get that next step. I don't know that we'll ever see a grade book again with 250 grades in a semester and extra credit and points marked off for late work, but we need to do a better job, and I think this gets us a long way towards that. So thank you very much for everybody's work on that.
Mrs. Paperman.
Mrs. Orwin?
Dr. Galligan, going back to IB and middle year, other than us saying that nobody can do it other than how we did it before or come up with something different, is there anything that would service a student more to have Goldwater and Norterra Canyon have to convert again?
President Paperman, Ms. Ordway, I'm going to turn this over to Kathy. Kathy was an administrator at Barry Goldwater,
Yes.
so she's very knowledgeable in this area.
President Paperman and Ms. Ordway, there can be some things we could do in the gradebook. We need to meet with the program leads. For example, there could be a additional or different scale for that standards
I don't mean to
reporting?
cut you off. My
Yes.
question was not what you can do.
Okay.
Is there actually a reason to do it other than you're trying to make it like the rest of the district, even though Goldwater's IB program and Norterra's program are not like the rest of the district?
President Paperman, Ms. Ordway, when we met with the team, we went forward with direction from the board that we were looking for a unified grading practices across our district, even though primary is a little bit different, and we know IB is different. But the team, with the 5 times we met, felt that this is what we wanted to present. That doesn't mean that we cannot come back if need be when we work with the IB leads at the 2 schools. But to answer your question, no, there doesn't necessarily have to be a reason. It's just the team went forward with what we felt the board had asked of us.
Right. And I know we asked you and you came up with it, but it's a really simple, clear question. Other than us saying to do this, would there be a purpose for IB to go, oh, wait a minute, let's add another step to our grading practices? Or can they be whole without doing this, with the rest of the district doing it, knowing that the rest of the district does not do things according to IB and middle years? I just see it as an extra step to, I don't know, I just see it as a waste of time for them. That's all. I don't see anything good that comes from IB having to add something.
President Paperman, Ms. Ordway, again, it comes back to Power School, and if the majority of that school is on one scale, can we work it so that for those particular children, they can be on a different scale? And we'll work with Power School to see if that's possible.
Just making sure we're not making, an extra step just to fit in, even though it doesn't really fit in. Thank you.
So discussing about IB, like I stated in the past, my daughter, Barry Goldwater IB. IB, apparently, this is throughout other countries. They have grades same that you have here, or grades, or how they're going to be adapted. And I know that they also have the team for the IB program. They have their own criteria of what they're going to adapt for the IB program. From my own understanding, when my daughter was in the IB. I do have a question with the 4, for example, like the 1, 2, 3, and 4. Is the 4, which is highly proficient, correlated to the weight of an 8, which is a 90 to 100%? Like if a parent asks, well, what does a 4 mean? So is that correlated with the letter A to 90 to 100%?
President Paperman, that is correct.
Okay, so 3 proficient would be a B, 80 to 89%. I also have another question of looking at the chart that the teachers will be following. So it says proficient B 89% to 80% to 89%. My question is, for example, 85 to 89%, mostly 3s with some 4s, all 3s on standards. So mostly 3s, so it's a specific, so I guess they gotta calculate like how many 3s, 4s they have in order to get 85 to 89%. Like if a parent looks at this chart, will they understand this?
Do you want to take it?
President Paperman, I swear I'll get it right. Members of the board. Yeah, so they would, depending on the number of standards, the teacher would determine how many 3s and 4s, and then on this scale, assign a letter grade. So mostly 3s with some 4s, the teacher could give anywhere between an 85 and 89%. So again, giving them that autonomy, as well as all 3s on standards would get anywhere from an 89 to an 85%. And if you look over in the next little box right there, 84 to 80%, mostly 3s and 4s with a 2. So we were just trying to disseminate, where on our rubrics with our 4-to-1 scale that things would kind of fit, depending on how many standards a teacher is assessing in a coursework assignment or a.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure because I know parents are gonna say, well, how many threes do they need to have a percent? How many twos or, so from my understanding, there's a correlation. They can add 90, 80, 70s to get to that percentage from my understanding.
They would be assessing multiple standards. So if you had one standard that you were assessing, and a student got a 3 on that standard based on my rubric that I was using to grade the assignment, then I would give them anywhere between an 89 and an 85%. Most teachers use rubrics with these 4 categories: highly proficient, proficient, partially proficient, and then minimally proficient. And so to answer your question, you're kind of looking at like multiple standards, right? So it just depends on how many standards a teacher is assessing at that time, and then also the points correlated with the assignment or assessment.
Okay, I just want to make sure that this will be clear for the parents and students. Like if they say, well, how many 3s do I need? How many 4s? So if we can make it more clear to them what the meaning of this chart is, for them to understand, like how to get that grade.
President
Yes.
Paperman, parents can, on the web version at this moment, they can see what the overall course grade is, and then they can click on an icon, and it'll open up that particular assignment or assessment, and it'll list the standards. We've had that for a while now, and they can see 3, 3, 4, and then the grade that they get should be somewhere in that 85 to 89% range.
Okay, thank you, thank you. I also have another question. So, thank you for all the hard work that you put into this, and parents and students will have a better understanding what the meaning of their grade is and how they got it, and they can actually calculate how they got an A, a B, or C. So my question is, it's great that this is going to be unified. My question is, it would be fantastic, for example, if the high schools, in the future, can we look at the data since we're going to be on the same grading scale, strength and weaknesses, eventually for that to be presented to the board?
President Paperman, this will be a unified grading practices for Deer Valley, and it will be in place for all schools, elementary, middle, and high school. And we should be able to, just like we've done in the past, Dr. Smith pulls those reports for grades, and we can bring that either at the end of quarters or at the end of semesters, and you can see that by school.
Thank you, I appreciate. Mrs. Simachek, do you have any questions?
I do not. Thank you.
No questions. Mrs. Fisher?
Well, I can't see the presentation. It doesn't appear to be in board docs for the public. Not for the public. I can't log in because I'm not because I don't have my hotspot for the network. But from what I heard, they're talking about one meaningful grade a week. Okay. If my accounting clerks only did one meaningful data entry a week, I'd fire them. And I understand that we're not always going to have, 100 grades. But the whole point of returning to the 0 to 100 or the original traditional grading scale was so that we had actual evidence of work done, work completed, work that would total up to something. Whatever you were going to be grading, you would, whether it's proficiency in one or more, you would turn in a paper. It's kind of like when you okay, everybody in this room is I'm sure highly educated. When you had to do your dissertation or defend your master's or whatever, you didn't walk in with just a piece or a one, or, I mean, I don't know about you, but I had to do a full out business plan. I had to come up with, I think it was a 130-page document that I had to get up in front of my professors and my peers, and I had to defend my work. I do see where you've made an effort, but from what I see, and this is, and I'm playing devil's advocate here because I think this is what the parents are going to see, is that we just found a new way to do standards-based grading and then convert it to something else to convert it back.
President Paperman, Ms. Fisher, most grade books, if you open them up, have multiple grades. We will have 3 grade categories: assessment, coursework, and practice. Really, we are targeting those teachers who may have 3 grades through the whole quarter or semester, so that every teacher in our district minimally will have at least 1 meaningful grade a week, and at least every 2 weeks that grade will impact the final grade. So parents aren't surprised at the end of a grading period when a teacher puts everything in at the end. We've done our best to make sure that we are valuing practice, and that's why there's a practice category, that there is a category called coursework for quizzes and other classwork that may happen, and then the summative assessment. So I think, as Ginny mentioned, it is a rare grade book where you're going to see so few grades, but we do have them, and the team really wanted to ensure that as a unified district, there were expectations, and this is that expectation for meaningful grades.
Well, I would recommend that this at least get put before the parents, because the last thing we need to do is just jump through these. Nobody wants to put staff through the rigmarole of putting everything in place and doing something, then putting it out there for the parents to say, this makes no sense, or for teachers, for that matter, to say, this makes no sense.
Okay.
That's just my take on it.
President Paperman, Ms. Fisher, as a parent of 4 DVUSD kids myself, exactly the scenario that Dr. Galligan spoke of. I have had a child that's had teachers do 3 grades a quarter. I've had teachers who have done 15 grades a quarter. We are already expected as teachers in this district to do 1 meaningful grade a week in our grade books as it is. This is just putting it on paper, so it's every single teacher has to do this. If I may answer to your question about this is just standards-based grading to conversion. Again, I'm a phase 3 school. I'm at a traditional academy where we do the 0 to 100%. This is not standards-based grading. This is doing what we already do. We already do our standards, and now we're correlating it for the parents and the kids to know exactly how they're learning and where their grade is going to be in the 0 to 100%, which is what was asked of us to come up. So it's just making a correlation so that we're all unified, because I was doing things different than a phase 2 school, than a phase 1 school. And I've had, like I said, one of my children's teachers would never give 4s or never give 1s. Now it's all unified. We're all doing this together.
So I just would like to say about a meaningful grade. I was, in the classroom teacher. So from my understanding is that it is a requirement that every teacher needs to have a grade every week. We do give multiple tests during the week, and if we want to grade them during that week, then we'll just put the grades in. If not, then probably the following week, but 1 grade has to be in every week. So that's what you mean by meaningful grade. It doesn't mean that it's going to be 1 grade, every week. It could be, eventually
grades.
multiple grades are going to be into the report card.
It could very well be multiple grades. And it could be in any one of those three categories, but every 2 weeks, a grade would have to be entered that impacted the final grade.
Thank you. Any other question, board members? Mr. Carver?
So again, as I mentioned, amazing work, Dr. Callaghan and team, as always. My concern is that I'm pretty sure when the community came in last year into this year, that their hope was that they would see something more along the lines of what we all saw when we were growing up. I understand that we grade to standards. I've had conversations with many of you that have tried to re-educate me that when I used to take the speed tests in math with the 100 questions in 60 seconds, that I wasn't actually learning, I was memorizing. I challenge you on that, but that's neither here nor there. I'm just concerned that where it looks like we've really bridged the gap between the direction that the administration was trying to go and what the community wanted. My concern is that the community, this is not their expectation. Their expectation was that we were going to go and see multiple grades, everything being graded, homework that was receiving some sort of weight, and something a little bit more traditional when we say traditional grading. So I know that we're going to have time for the community to email us and give us their concerns with what's been presented. I believe that this is a good compromise, but I guess the overwhelming question that keeps coming through in my mind is the word why. Why did we transition from the old grading system to we've always taught the standards. You know, you had to learn multiplication. That was the standard. You had to learn how to phrase a sentence and use all the word parts and sentence parts. That was the standard. But now we've given everything all these colorful titles and changed grading scales, and everybody's, I mean, for lack of better terminology, there's a lot of people that are just freaked out. And I'm just curious why we need to push this so hard and why we can't just go back to the good old days. Go ahead.
President Paperman, Mr. Carver, I was actually one of the parents that spoke at the standards-based grading as not a proponent of that, as a parent and an educator. But after doing this committee, let me take that back. I don't want to say but. After doing this committee, seeing the compromise, like you had mentioned, and actually listening to other people, what they're talking about and what we're already doing. And again, me being at the traditional school, we weren't doing the standards-based. And just hearing what they were saying, I'm like, oh, I'm doing exactly what we came to the compromise of. I'm doing the grades and the standards, which is what our job is, to teach these kids the standards. So I think that having it like this in what we came to a compromise on is that it just makes it much easier for students to see where they are and for educators to see where their students are, but it's easy for parents to understand as well.
And
President Paperman, Mr. Carver, a parent would not ever have to click the icon that does a drop down of standards. All they would need to see is, here's the 100%, here's the 87%, here's the 72%, here's the 98%. They will see exactly a traditional grade book. If they are interested in identifying, my child got a C, and I need to understand why, they can click that icon and they can see that this particular standard was at a 1 or a 2. And then they can talk with the teacher, they can talk with their child, whatever it is. But they don't ever have to do that should they not want to. They will see a very traditional report card with assessments, coursework, practice as the categories.
thank you.
Mrs. Orway?
Mr. Carver, you mentioned the community, and we did hear the community members that were against. We heard some that were for. So when I balance all the emails and the notes from the board meetings, I see that what this group came up with is a blend of that. So normally when someone is against something, they're very loud and they come, but the other 30,000 parents or how many there that didn't come, are not against it. And I think that when we say, let's go back to the good old days, we don't live in the good old days. So perhaps coming into 2023 with this compromise, and I don't see it as a compromise when we're doing things that are good for kids, but that we can propel our kids a little bit faster and a little bit better, because if they're doing, if they're not being pushed on artificially, and they actually are learning the standards, which means that they have skills now that they'll take with them instead of just kind of getting over the hump. I'm not saying that that won't happen a little bit, but perhaps a second grade and a fourth grade and a fifth grade teacher, and I know those ninth grade teachers will be awfully excited to teach ninth grade work when those eighth graders get to them. So this might be a way to move that forward. So we did have parents in the community that were against it, and some of them are for it now because now they understand that it's being done for children, that the learning is more important than, hey, this is how I teach. But there were plenty of parents that were very interested in having it as the first or second iteration that it was. And I think that the blend is going to work. And you have professionals that came up with this. We always talk about valuing what teachers think and what they do and what their job is there in the trenches. And yet we come to these kind of meetings and study sessions and we don't believe them or something along those lines. So I just want to make sure that the respect for the work is there, and that if we say we value teachers, then perhaps when they give us this, because I'm sure it wasn't a vacuum that you guys were in, that perhaps we need to think about that when we make decisions.
President Paperman, let me be clear. You gave us direction for A through F, and you gave us direction for a 0 to 100%. Every single educator who came together in that work team held that close in any of the conversations and when we were working toward consensus and working towards decisions. The work that you see there came from the teachers that were part of that team. So to be clear again, we feel we did exactly as you asked, A through F, 0 through 100, and we have given you our best effort in what we believe is good for children, for educators, and to be transparent as it relates to the standards that parents get every summer for the standards that their kids took the test on, and they can see that through the year, should they choose. If they choose not to, they will always only see a percentage for their child for those assignments.
I just want to clarify to Mr. Carver, like, for example, I'm going to give an example from what parent perspective might be. Let's say they see proficient compared to standard-based grading, they will understand, well, I know what proficient is because it's correlated to a B, which is 80 to 89%. And if the parent wants to go even further, the teacher can provide, well, how did a student get proficient? And 80 to 89%, and that's where the teachers are going to be providing those assessments where they were measured with those standards. So parents will see the percentage and how they got it and what standards that the students were assessed. So I believe that parents will be more clear than the standard-based grading, that they have more to compare, like why my child got an 81, 89%.
Mrs. Pickman. And when we have students that are barely getting it in what we consider an average amount of time, we do have communication with parents anyway, correct? Or no?
President Paperman, members of the board, yes, we do communicate with students when they are struggling or when we have an academic concern.
I know you communicate with the students, but I'm more interested in with the parent
Parents,
or guardian.
yes, we communicate with students and parents when we have an academic concern. And we have interventions put in place, and then also directions we take with Tier 2 and Tier 3 instruction.
Mrs. Fisher?
I just want to make a few things, I guess, fairly clear. When we had these rooms full of parents and teachers coming to talk, they weren't just looking for the old way. They were concerned about children. Children were their primary, their only concern. They were concerned about children who lost scholarships. They were concerned about children who were giving up. They were concerned about children who just had no reason to do the work because it didn't matter anyway. They were concerned about a lot of things, but just to do things the old way was not anything I ever heard from a teacher or from a parent or from a student. They all were very clear that what we were doing was hurting them. If this is put to the parents and to all the teachers, not just the small group of teachers, all the teachers, I would like to hear what they have to say, how they feel about it. Because at the end of the day, it's the children who will be impacted. And that impact can be little, it can be big, and it can be catastrophic.
President Paperman, Ms. Fisher, if you see that we have a 0 to 100% scale, and for those educators who feel a 0 is necessary, and that will, of course, skew final grades, but it is there now. And so 0 to 100% is what we have had for many years, and as far as it impacting scholarships, there should not be any difference in children's ability to earn scholarships with 0 to 100% A through F, because we can make those translations for colleges, or colleges can take our grades.
But they didn't. And that's where, I think that's where the concern is that, and I think parents and students and colleges are less concerned with the 0 than they are with the top grade. Anyone can look at averages and say, okay, well, this kid has a 0, let's drop off the 0, what's their grade? And you see the difference. But when you drop off the 0 and they still have a 49 or a whatever on their actual paper, their work, and yet they get a 3 because that's someone's assessment or a belief. And that's what was occurring. I'm not saying that's what will occur with this, but that's what was reported that was occurring. Was, teacher A says it's good, and we have no way of knowing, is it good? Or is that just the opinion of that one individual? And that was the bigger takeaway that I think I got from parents, was they don't just want an opinion, they want evidence. Just like we have to have evidence in everything, in our financials and what we do. I think that's more what they were looking for. So the focus on the 0, but I just want to make it clear that there were no parents that came here or teachers that came here because they just wanted the old way. They had kids, their primary thought. And I just want to make sure that we're being respectful of them as well, even though they're not here tonight. I mean, they knew they couldn't talk, so of course they won't come. So I just want to make sure that is, I would like to see it put before them and see what they think and see what they say, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to have to live with it.
President Paperman, Ms. Fisher, to speak to two of your points for like language arts, for example, I teach high school ELA. I teach 9th graders and 11th graders, and I use rubrics with highly proficient, proficient, partially proficient, and minimally proficient, and I grade students on one standard. ELA 9th grade standards, they spiral throughout the year, so I'm repeating those standards several. Some of the standards are very long, and so I break them up into different parts. So, for example, reading literature .1 is citing text evidence and being able to make inferences based on that text evidence. And so the first thing that I do with students is assess the first part of that standard and communicate to students and parents through my grades and the marked on the rubric as to how their student is doing on that skill. And so I feel like the communication is there. I don't feel like it's a guess. I feel like it's my educated opinion based on my experience of where they are at and how well they're able to master that standard, and then how well they'll be able to master subsequent standards, as well as when the rigor continues to get more difficult throughout the year, and adding on the other parts of that standards, like making inferences based on the text evidence. And so that's how I feel that I communicate my grades to my parents and my students in my classes. Also with the 0 to 49%, in the past, we used to use 0 when Deer Valley, when in the classroom and with the online program. And I can tell you that telling or reaching out to a student with a 13%, it was very hard to get them motivated because they saw no end in sight. They didn't see a light at the end of the tunnel. They were defeated. At a 49%, I can show them hope. You know, you have the ability to get your grade up, to show me that you are able to do this. And it's a less of a hole to dig them out of. And so we still have 0. We have 0 to 100% right now with this. But I do believe the behaviors decrease when students see that they do have a ability to pass the course, to be successful, and to show their success in their classes.
I appreciate that. I really do. And I know that some teachers would do wonderfully, no matter what grading scale we give them. I know that. But I also know that I finished my master's in like 2014, I want to say. And I always remember one of my courses that I went into, and we had a young lady in our team because for some reason colleges want to do everything in teams. But there was a couple of younger people who had graduated within a couple of years. And I was always shocked that they could not write a 5-minute speech. They could not appropriately cite documentation. They could not appropriately take it into a third person, remove the emotion out of it. They could not. And yet they graduated. I don't want that to be Deer Valley. I'm not saying it is. The students were not from Deer Valley, but I'm saying I don't want that. And one of the other things that we hear a lot from colleges is kids get out of high school, we have to put them in remedial coursework. And that is something that we do hear a lot. And I am concerned that where you might be an awesome teacher at something or at this, there may be one who's struggling, or there may be. And so when it becomes an opinion, and it is your educated opinion, there also has to be an evidence. You know, in my career, I can give an opinion, and I do on a regular basis. In my opinion, this program could yield this amount of revenue. In my opinion, I've looked at the market, and I believe that the markets are flowing this direction. And I can be right, and I can be wrong. But at the end of the day, my board expects that I will run the numbers, and I will give them data. And I think that's more so is what I'm indicating. So, but this might be doing it. But I would like to see it. I would like the teachers, all teachers, and to be able to see it and give their opinion.
President Paperman, Mrs. Fisher, this is exactly, I think, why we could come to a unanimous decision on this. There are teachers that I had already said that are different, have different educated opinions and things like that. But we meet in our PLCs every single week to come up with a rubric that is unified to meet the specifications of our opinions being put into this rubric, but everybody's going to use the same rubric. And now with this this graph with the calculations assessment grades, there's no iffies. There's no you get a 93 to a 90 if you have mostly 4s with some 3s and or 2s. We've never been given something like this, especially at a phase 3 school. So just having this, it answers a lot of those questions where we're going to be unified. But we also create those rubrics at our PLCs. Like I said, I completely see where you're coming
How
from.
did you determine the 4, the 3, and the 2?
In our PLCs together when we write our rubrics.
How do you come to that conclusion with a student?
President Paperman, Mrs. Fisher, I think the key is spirals all the way back to our Arizona State Standard. In the Arizona State Standards, there's performance indicators, and those performance indicators are based on highly proficient, and it goes right down. So when we meet, and not just in our campus PLCs, we're talking even into our multi-school collaborative teams. I mean, the one I belong to is up to 4 campuses now. So when we sit down and we're talking about these standards that we're teaching to, we're able to correlate the standards to the student's grades. So it's a whole big picture, and it's not just something that we've created. We're digging and using stuff that the Department of Education has given us.
I'm not doubting that part at all. I'm not even doubting that in any way, shape, or form. Let me take it to an explanation that a teacher would give. So you are a special education teacher. You have 5 students, okay? You assess what they're doing, you watch what they're doing, you work with them. Now you're a high school teacher. You have 30 students in 7 classes. Let's do the math. Are you able to keep track of, yep, this rubric and that rubric, but they didn't turn in any work? You didn't grade any work. You don't have work to look at, to look at that true scale, but you're going to remember of all those students what each one is and just make a decision. That's what I'm asking is, how are you determining the 2, 3, or 4? Do you see what I'm saying? Does that make more sense?
President Paperman, Mrs. Fisher, I think so. When you say all in your head, like I would have evidence of student work. All of my student work is turned in on Canvas, and I make notations on their assignments and grade them based on the rubric. So I would have evidence to show them, hey, you did really well here, you got it on this standard. However, down here, you're not elaborating your evidence, you're repeating yourself. I don't understand what you're trying to say. So I don't think anything's done in our heads.
So you are entering all that. You are putting that all in.
Yes, I am. So
Even if it's not
mean,
the one meaningful.
yes, so I do a little bit more than one meaningful grade a week, so I will continue with that, doing more than one meaningful grade a week. That's just how I like to keep my grade book and assess my standards. So it would be recorded and there will be evidence. So you could pull up my grade book right now and I'd be happy to show you evidence of why I scored my students the way that I did. And I think that it
Can
does.
we just ensure that what she's doing is being
Well, and
done
I
by
do
all
think, you know,
teachers?
we work collaboratively in our PLC teams to move towards this direction. So I think it was identified that there are some people that do it very well, and there are some people that have the right intention, but they're just not there yet. And so within our PLCs, within our multi-school PLCs, I mean, I think it's a huge thing that Ms. Mullins came to this group with a different opinion and was able to understand where we're coming from and the positive intentions that we have to get all teachers on the same level and to support the ones that don't see it yet in a collaborative and supportive group.
So I would like to clarify, I think the confusion is one meaningful grade. From a teacher perspective, to me, it was a requirement that every teacher had to get a grade every week, but you have the options to put multiple grades. It's better than having 0 grade and the administrator will be sending you an email, what's the grade, at least have 1 grade for this week and then add the rest of them, whenever you have a chance on the weekend. But it's not that it's going to be 1 meaningful grade every week. I think that's where the confusion is. It's a requirement that it has to be 1 grade for that week.
President Paperman, we actually got very detailed with this, where we talked about what a meaningful grade was, what it would consist of. In our power schools, we have the option to actually put a grade in there, but not count toward the final grade. Those are things that we can communicate to parents saying, oh, look at how your student is doing, but those are all grades that are going to come up to this meaningful grade. So some teachers do not know that there's an option like that on power schools, that you don't have to count it toward the final grade, but it's still communicating with parents and students.
And Ms. Paperman, again, if you see that slide, it's at least 1 meaningful assessment or assignment grade per week, at least. Our target here is not the vast majority of teachers who who have multiple grades, sometimes upward to 30, 40 grades. It's for the teachers that wait until the end or don't get information in for parents to look at in a timely manner. That's what this is for.
Right, and this is what I'm saying, that's where the confusion is. It's not that it's going to be one meaningful grade every week. It's a requirement that the teacher to have a grade every week. You could choose 5 grades every week, 1 grade every week, but at the end, you have to have all the grades in.
Yes, and something that hasn't been requested or required before is that every 2 weeks, a grade has to impact that final grade so that a parent can look and see at week 3, at week 7, and at week 9 and know how their child is doing, rather than waiting until the end of that quarter or that semester.
Mr. Carver?
So, Dr. Galligan, and your team, I just want to be clear. I know sometimes it's hard when we start giving you a bunch of questions and peppering you with everything, but you did exactly what was asked, and I think what you came up with is great. The first time that I looked at it, I thought, hey, everybody's listening. We can now meet the public's requirement for the 0 to 100, A through F. We still have the standards-based mindset, which is making sure that the children learn the standards. So sometimes we have to ask these questions, not from a personal point of view, but because we need to make sure that the community understands. They don't get the benefit of necessarily seeing all the information that we get or speaking with you through email or in personal conversation. So I just wanted to take a second to thank you for everything, because as you've pointed out several times, every decision that was made was unanimous. And there's 26 members on your team, and that's not a small feat. So, and I can tell by looking across some of the members that are here, there are strong proponents of SBG, and there are people that did not like SBG, not one bit. So I just, in the middle of all this, just please understand that your work does not go unappreciated, and I think you did exactly what was asked of you by the board. So I want to thank you for that. And I know that sometimes the way that I present information is a little bit off when I say the good old days. But I think, unfortunately, a lot of people just don't understand change. And sometimes it's the why. And that's why I asked earlier, what is the overarching reason that we need to move this direction? And I don't know that we accurately answered that, but we've discussed throughout this whole last year and into this year when it came to standards-based grading that, and a lot of people in the community agreed that maybe this is the wave of the future. Maybe it is something that needs to be done, but better execution, better launching in the schools, easing into it. And we all agreed, even the people that wanted traditional grades 0 through 100, that we needed to teach the standards. The schools are graded on how well we teach the standards by the state. So it's something that needs to be managed. Unfortunately, in today's world of catchphrases and buzzwords, almost everything that comes out of our mouth is going to sink us one way or the other. So I just wanted to make sure after my last round of comments that you understand that I like what I see. I think it's the word compromise has been used in a negative fashion when it comes to this, but I believe that you met the community's requirement. I think, like Mrs. Paperman pointed out, it does say at least one meaningful grade a week, and that was a reoccurring theme when discussing standards-based grading, but nobody's seeing the at least part. There are teachers that will take advantage of that. We understand that. And then there are teachers that are doing their job, and we understand that. So I just wanted to voice my appreciation and try to clear that up. It's hard to be on that end, no different than it is to be up here and try to separate the wheat from the chaff. So I appreciate all of you and what you've done. Thank you.
I have one more question with the categories and weighing. I just want to make sure that parents have an understanding on this. So assessment is 80%, coursework is 20%, practice is 0%. So what does practice mean?
President Paperman, on page 6 of the grading practices, it goes into the definitions of the categories. The assessment, the category is all items used to measure a student's proficiency toward the learning standard once the student has had sufficient practice and at a specified point in time. They also give this category can include summative tests, performance assessments, reports, unit or module assessments, quizzes, long-term projects, short-term projects, presentations, capstone projects, research papers, and lab reports. Coursework includes formative work that provides students with the opportunity to learn content and skills and to receive feedback on their learning. Coursework is assigned to provide meaningful independent practice, reinforce learning targets, and extend learning. This category can include in-class assignments, quizzes, exit tickets, checks for understanding, and daily activities. Practice, this category includes formative student work that a student completes while in the process of learning specific skills. Student work that is done inside and outside of the classroom, such as classwork and homework, falls into this category. And I think that this is what has not been defined before. As a teacher in this district for 23 years, we've never actually had it this specific. So I think, again, it brings us into this unified community of educators that this is what we can accept for assessments, coursework, and practice.
So you're saying that practice, everything that you said is not weighted, is a 0% then. So basically, the grade book is going to be on standards, assessment, and coursework, but practice is not going to be weighed.
President Paperman, schools will be able to use all three: assessment, coursework, and practice. If you notice, in assessment and coursework, quizzes fall in both. That's the teacher's prerogative to determine where that should fall in those two areas as far as the weight goes. But we felt it was very important when you think about a standards-based mindset and the importance of practice before actual understanding what a child knows and is able to do, still to be a category. And the team unanimously felt that these three categories were important for all teachers to use.
Okay, and I have another question. So no penalties for behavioral elements, no extra credits. So penalties will be like behavioral is not going to interfere with the grading, but at the same time, being in the classroom myself, there's also differentiation with students' ability, so wouldn't extra credit apply to certain students to differentiate depending on if they're special ed or learning disability, or so should extra credit be included to differentiate in the grading system or no extra credit?
President Paperman, the team unanimously agreed that there would be no extra credit. However, they felt that there were enough mitigating strategies in place with this DVUSD grading practices for late work, missing work, and reassessment, that would overcome the need for extra credit. Extra credit distorts a grade, and it doesn't give an accurate reflection of what a student knows and is able to do, especially against specific standards or even on any of the assignments. When we look at penalties for behavioral elements, there are still penalties built into late work and missing work. Don't think that there isn't. The team felt very strongly that there needed to be accountability there, and it's built into this. But when we think about a teacher who perhaps has had it up to here with a student and chooses not to offer them the ability to turn something in or slash something because of a behavior, the team unanimously felt that there would not be penalties for that. That's not to say that as a district we are not going to be pursuing behavior in our grade book as a grade. That is something that we'll be working toward over the next year.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that parents and community members understand the meaning of the percentage, 1 no extra credit means 1 no penalty for behavior. Thank you for the clarification. If there's any parents or community members that have questions, please email the board and we'll provide those emails to Dr. Finch and Dr. Galligan. Any other questions, board members? Mr. Carver?
Just a quick question. Is this information that the community can get to? And if so, where?
President Paperman, Mr. Carver, we didn't want to put it on our website until the board had looked at it. It's already been previewed by teachers in our PRAG team and all of our K-12 administrators. And we will get this up on our website tomorrow, and it will go out through our administrators to teachers tomorrow. We have pre-K-12 tomorrow, so we'll be able to share it out.
Thank you so much, Dr. Galligan. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Galligan and the committee for all their hard work, and I'm very happy that everyone is going to be unified so we can all look at the data and compare data, strengths and weaknesses, provide intervention and support. Thank you again. No other questions from board members? So I'm going to call the meeting to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.